What's up, guys? This is Blue TTCG back with another Vanguard deck profile, this time for Premium. This is going to be Silver Thorn Pale Moon deck profile. Silver Thorn has had quite a disappointing tenure in history throughout most of G era, pretty much all G era, in fact. They've been quite poor as a strategy. It wasn't until Premium Collection 2019 where we received Darklord Princess and its supporting cast members that allowed us to really make full use of what Silver Thorn really could excel in, which was stacking Upright Lion to huge numbers like 50,000 power and getting multiple of them on the Excel circles in order to really abuse that and make it hard for your opponent to guard. So with that in mind, let's go ahead and go right into the deck profile. We're going to start off with the grade zeros and trigger units. So for our starter, we're running one copy of Silver Thorn Beast Tamer Emile. So I'll explain in depth every single card in this deck because this deck has really been one of my favorites, and basically what I have here is the product of a lot of playtesting, a lot of contemplating, and much heartbreak as well. So Emile is, one of the end results of that, all of that pouring over what to decide to run as a starting Vanguard. And Emile, I think, is what allows for Silver Thorn to do what they do best, which is spam cards from the soul a bunch of times during the main phase and battle phase and stack up those upright lions to a bunch of power, right? The thing is, Emile, in order for all that to be done, Emile is going to give us the soul that we need, because we do need soul. We do need all the cards in the soul, such as Selvia, such as Zelma, to be in the soul in order to be able to do all of that. And what Emile allows us to do is to get that going consistently right off the bat, starting from turn 1. And so that way we don't miss a beat when we start going to our grade 3 turns with Venus Luquier and such. So it's important to understand about Emile that it does not require a counterblast, which was pretty much a huge selling point to me. And also it does not require a generation break, because this card was printed back in BT15, which was one of the latter sets of the OG era of Vanguard. So it really helps to have Emile to be able to start getting those cards in the soul, those essential combo pieces such as the ones I mentioned earlier, and that way we're able to get going right away without losing any speed. And the other card that I'm going to mention before we go into the trigger units, we're going to talk about Lolotte. So I am running 2 copies of Lolotte. This was the card I was using as my starting Vanguard for quite a while until recently. Basically, my reasoning behind running Lolotte as a starting Vanguard in the past was that you could guarantee yourself a grade 3 to hand on your grade 2 turn if you start with Lilian in your hand at least, and you run Lolotte as your starting Vanguard. The combo is basically you do your normal write-up, like it doesn't matter what you write as your grade 1, although typically writing Irina is the best grade 1 write. We'll talk about her a little later. But basically you write into Lilian, and then you counterblast 1 for Lilian's skill to put any grade 3 from your deck into your soul. And then you call another rearguard so that you're able to get Lolotte's skill off. And then at the end of the turn, you'd put that other rearguard into the soul along with Lolotte. You'd countercharge the counterblast that you spent for Lilian's skill, and then you'd add the grade 3 that you added from Lilian's skill to your hand. And that was like a nice way of getting a grade 3 straight to hand without any hoops or hurdles. The problem with that play, it's not really like a problem per se, it's just that in the end, I just thought about opportunity costs, like thinking about the long term, over the course of the game. Whenever you go for that play, whenever you prioritize that play as your main early game, strategy, you start losing out on cards you would have had in your soul if you ran Emile as a starting Vanguard, because Emile allows you to start getting those cards, those essential combo pieces into the soul right off the bat, which is extremely important going into mid and late game. So and also, of course, late game, it allows for a lot of filtering, which I should have mentioned when we were talking about Emile. But basically, Emile allows you late game to filter out your deck for all your triggers. And again, having that as your starting Vanguard guarantees that you're able to get that started right away. Whereas all Lolotte really does is get that guaranteed grade 3 early game. And of course, she does give you a recursive countercharges every turn. But also the fact that she's searchable off of Lilian further kind of discouraged me from running her as a starting Vanguard, because she isn't necessarily essential early game. She's just more so of like a really really nice benefit to have. But I think Emile is pretty much that essential role as a starting Vanguard. And the reason why we're running 2 copies of Lolotte is I was always like afraid of seeing a Lolotte in the damage zone and then not having her for the rest of the game, because Lolotte is literally like the backbone of your recursive plays. She allows your resource engine to, just keep chugging, and it ensures that you keep up your hand size along with being able to continue discarding grade 3s for stride cost, which of course is extremely important for this deck because we're not running stride fodder crit, as you'll see soon here. But we're running 2 copies just in case one will go in the damage zone. Now, of course, it's not very likely that one goes in the damage zone by the time we do need to get her in the soul. But again, just for comfort reasons, I did want to run 2 copies of her. You can definitely decide to run one of her if you feel better about that, if you need to make more space for other cards. And one of the cards I had to take out, which we'll go over later, which is the new Maricica card that we received in Clan Collection Volume 3. It was very hard to cut that card down by 1 because I felt like it was really important for your grade 2 turn. But regardless, we'll talk about that a little later. That's all for Lolotte, 2 copies of her. And that's going to do it for the grade 0s. Let's go into the trigger units that are in the deck. So we've got, to start out, 4 copies of Candy Clown. This is the vanilla heal trigger from V-Series. To be honest, I do think it's probably better to run the Heal Guardian, but Heal Guardians are a little expensive right now, and I didn't already have it back when it was a little cheaper, so that's pretty much the reason why I have this. But at the same time, having this is still nice because it is a 20k shield, and if you ever find this card in the soul, then you're able to call it off of Wandering Dragon, which is one of the G Guardians that we're running. It allows you to get allows you to soul charge 1 and call a unit from your soul to Guardian Circle. So this is technically the highest shield value that we can obtain from that kind of play, and that 20k shield definitely comes up, so it's non-trivial. Not to mention that honestly Pale Moon's G Guardians are kind of garbage, so I think a lot of times you'll find yourself in a better position by calling the heal guardian, or by calling the heal trigger to Guardian Circle rather than discarding it for a G Guardian, because most of the time the most shield you'll get out of a G Guardian is around 25 or 30k if you're lucky. Like if you get Cold Hard, you can get 30k, but generally the opportunity cost late game is just not there. So the 20k shield definitely comes up. It's very useful. The only reason I would run a heal guardian is basically for that early game to make sure that you survive pretty much. But at the same time, that's only one turn where that really comes up. And not to mention that, the 20k shield over the course of, the whole game is really gonna be helpful, especially for a deck like this that seeks to draw through most of the deck by then. So we're running the vanilla heal triggers. And then next up, we're running 4 copies of our draw PG from V-Series, Hades Hypnotist. Pretty standard. There's not really much to say about it. We're not going to be running the Crit Sentinel because we do need a PG for this kind of deck. Not to mention that the draw power, especially for an Excel deck, just complements really well with the whole pace that this deck seeks to play at. So we do need this draw PG in the deck. And the great thing about running the draw PG is that the draw PGs, or in general the PGs from V-Series and onward, they allow the Perfect Guard ability to trigger when they're called from anywhere. It doesn't matter whether they're called from hand or from somewhere else. They can be called from anywhere and still get the PG effect off, which matters a lot for a card like Wandering Dragon, which is in our G zone. That G Guardian can call from Soul, and if we happen to Soul Charge this off of like Maricica or one of our other G Guardians, then we're able to actually call this straight from Soul to Guardian Circle and then discard a card. That way, we're able to basically PG from our Soul and potentially get around some guard restricts that would otherwise not be navigatable by this deck. So very important, actually, to run the draw PG. And then now for the rest of the triggers, we're running, not rest of the triggers, let's actually go over 5 of triggers for now. So we're running 1 copy of Olbaria, the Overtrigger, and 3 copies of the V-Series crit Silver Thorn Barking Dragon. So, I do want to explain some reasoning behind why I'm running these, but I will also explain some alternatives because I do think the alternatives, especially for this deck, are worth considering. So I'm running Olbaria, which is a vanilla Overtrigger, because I really thought of like the ability to stack Upright Line to 50k by its own ability, plus give 100 mil to 2 of your other units, such as like a Zelma in the back row, or a Lilian, or even a Cernay. I think is like the potential for that is really amazing. And it puts your opponent in a difficult position because typically they'd be saving the PGs to block the upright lines that are stacked up. but then they also have to deal with potential 100 mils in other columns, meaning they'll have to perfect guard those, plus they'll have to manually guard the upright lines, which can be very difficult, if not impossible by then. So I do think there's an argument to running the vanilla Overtrigger just for the extra 100 mil. But also the Dark States Overtrigger is pretty good, especially when you get an early game. Getting a permanent 10k power 1 crit to your Vanguard over the course of the game can really make a difference. It can put more pressure on your opponent, and also it can force them to guard at points they wouldn't otherwise guard, because normally they would be taking the Vanguard attack since it's usually 1 crit, but then they start seeing that, oh, upright line's going to come up soon, so I better guard this, and then the extra 10k in the crit is going to make them guard a little more than what they would otherwise guard with. So I definitely think there's an argument to running the Dark States Overtrigger over this one. And then as for the critical trigger we're running the V-Series Silver Thorn crit. The reason for this is only because I wanted to make Maricica and Irina more consistent. Maricica and Irina, when they're rode upon, or when they're rode and rode upon respectively, they allow us to soul charge off the top of the deck. And if we soul charge a certain number of cards with Silver Thorn in their name, then we draw a card. And that card draw is extremely important to hit. Like, we really want to be able to hit that because it allows us to recover the hand advantage we had from writing, and also allows us to get more out of the cards that we soul charge, because that's more of a potential to see a card like Zelma in our hand, which allows us to call the cards that we soul charge, and also allows us to see Selvia or any other support card that we might want to see and eventually put in the soul later on. So having this Silver Thorn name in one of our triggers allows those plays to be more consistent. Now, of course, I think this can be substituted for a Stride Fighter crit just fine, and especially considering this deck where we're discarding our important grade 3s often, because the grade 3s are usually re-rode for excels otherwise. If you replace the Stride Fighter crit, that allows you more flexibility. You can discard the Stride Fighter crit instead of discarding your grade 3 that you'd rather ride into to get more excel markers. But honestly, I haven't found this to be too much of a drawback to run, because again, having an extra Silver Thorn name really matters when you're going for those soul charges off of Maricica and Irina. So that's the explanation behind these triggers. And then finally, I think the next trigger is pretty much non-negotiable. If you're not running this, then I think you're really giving yourself an unnecessary handicap for Silver Thorn. We're running 4 copies of Dixie. Dixie is quite honestly the best card in the deck. Early game, really good, especially when you get your first grade 3 ride. Mid game, it's good for getting it back in the deck. Late game, it is good to prevent you from decking out, because it allows you to basically get infinite recursion with regard to seeing it off the drive check, and then of course the next turn you're able to call it again and then use its skill to put it back on the top and then call from soul. So this card is amazing. It's flat out just a lifesaver for Silver Thorn in my opinion. And despite its being a 5k trigger, I mentioned in my Luard video that in order for an effect trigger from GR to be run, it either has to be just straight up like broken, or it has to be really good for the deck. And I don't think this card is broken, but I do think this card is extremely important for the deck. So it's definitely a 4 of in my opinion. Some lists will run 3. I don't think that's very good. I do think you want to see this card, especially on your first grade 3 turn or even your first stride. It's almost necessary to see this card in order to build your field, because basically this card can allow you on its own to build your entire field by means of cards like Selvia. If you call Selvia off of this, then you're able to use Selvia's skill to call 2 more, and then you're going to be using Zelma to call another one, and then of course you go from there. It really allows you to pop off as you would otherwise not be able to. Plus it allows your upright lion to get more stacks for free, which is something that we really value in this deck, because upright lion is our main goal for all that we're doing with the combos in this deck. So for Dixie, again, extremely important. I don't think this card can be exchanged for anything else. So that's going to do it for the trigger lineup. Let's go into the grade 1s. The grade 1s and the grade 2s, we're actually running 12 of each. So it's going to be pretty interesting to hear why we're running 12 of each. But of course, as you saw in the grade 0s and triggers, we're running a couple of extra grade 0s in order to make this deck more stable and consistent. So that's why we have to run only 12 grade 1s and 12 grade 2s. So first grade 1 we've got is 4 copies of Irina. This is your best grade 1 ride. This is the card that you want to see riding into grade 1 turn. This basically boosts the consistency of your whole deck going into the subsequent turns and such, because it allows you to start filling your soul right off the bat, as well as getting card draw, which again really matters for this deck, because Something this deck lacks is consistent card draw other than Doriane. And if Doriane happens to not be seen throughout that game, then you're going to really miss out. So having this Irina as your grade 1 ride is extremely important. Not to mention the second ability, which when placed from or the first ability rather, when placed from hand, it allows you to fill your soul using the top 2 cards of your deck. And usually, of course, it's not extremely impactful, the first skill, but when you do see Irina in your hand, and you have the space to call it because you still haven't seen everything that you need in your soul, then this can definitely help in terms of filtering out what you need to get in your soul. And of course, if you see a trigger, then if you could just put it at the bottom of the deck, no big deal. Although it is worth noting that you do have to put a card into soul from the first skill, so do keep that in mind, that it does not say that you need to put a Silver Thorn, but also that means that you do have to put something in the soul. So whatever you put in the soul, make sure that it's something that can benefit off of a future Wandering Dragon, just so that you can call that from soul later on. Such as if you see a PG or if you see a heal trigger, then those are not, terrible options to put in the soul, because they do have the best payoff from Wandering Dragon. So 4 copies of Irina, because we really want to see this as our grade 1 ride target. And again, it helps us get to where we need throughout the rest of the game. All right, next up is 3 copies of Anna. This is the new Anna that we got in Clan Collection Volume 3. At first I thought this card was like okay, and then I thought this card was amazing, and then I thought this card was okay again. And I'll go over kind of my mood swings with this card. There's an unfortunate restriction on this card that does not allow its ability to trigger unless it's placed on the rearguard circle due to the ability of your Vanguard with Silver Thorn in its name, which happens to be, I think, too harsh of a restriction. Now, of course, it also says that you cannot use it unless you've countercharged, unless you've not countercharged this turn already. That's not too huge of a deal compared to the other restriction where you have to have called it from a Vanguard's ability with Silver Thorn in its name. And it's truly a shame, because I feel like this card could have been like a superstar in this deck, but it turns out to just be an average card. Now, the nice thing about this is that with the way we built our deck, if you ride this as your grade 1 target, it's not too bad, to be honest, because we're not running Lolotte as our starter, meaning that typically if you ride into a grade 2 that counterblast for its skill, then you're going to get that counterblast back right away. And if you don't have a Lilian in your starting hand, for example, then you won't be seeing Lolotte anyway, meaning that at least it's not like you missed out on too much by riding into Anna in the first place over an Irina, because you do get that counter charge back right away, which allows you to use it for your grade 3 turn, no problem. So that's what Anna's here for at 3 copies. I do not think this card should be run at any more than 3 copies, however. This card, the payoff for running more copies gets worse and worse each game, because you really only need to see one of it in your deck, or one of it in your soul at most, perhaps 2. But the reason why we're running 3 copies is that it's an okay grade 1 ride target, so do keep that in mind. But that first ability, when wrote upon a counter charge, is pretty useful with the starter that we're running in Emile. If you decide to run Lolotte as your starter, however, I do think you should drop this to like 2 copies, just because it's not as good as a grade 1 ride target when you have Lolotte as your starter. So 3 copies of Anna. Next up is 3 copies of the most important grade 1 combo piece, Silver Thorn Assistant Zelma. This card is borderline broken. The only thing that stops it from being broken is basically the restriction on what you can call from the soul. You cannot call another Zelma from soul, which is quite obvious, because otherwise this would be an infinite loop, right? But this card is still flat out insane when you have 2 more of it in your soul. We're running 3 copies because literally having 3 in your soul means that you'll be able to put a Zelma in the soul and then call another thing like a Selvia, and you'll be able to use Selvia to put to counterblast call 2 more. You can call the Zelma that you just put in the soul plus another thing, and then you can use Zelma to put Selvia in the soul again, call something else out, and then during the battle phase when you go into your multi-attacks, you can put the Zelmas in your soul, call the Zelmas back out, and then reset your columns again and do a bunch of crazy stuff. And by doing all of that, you're able to get your upright lions to the upwards 50,000, 60,000 power that I was mentioning. And I said upright lions, yes, plural. That means you're going to have a bunch of upright lions. The goal with this deck is to have a bunch of upright lions on your Excel markers. That way that, whenever you call stuff from soul to rearguard circle with your main board, not your additional rearguard circles, that you're allowed to reset them as you like. And your upright lions on the Excel circles will still be able to swing for huge numbers. because they get extra 3,000 power each time you call something from Soul. So Zelma is extremely important to see either in hand or in the Soul throughout the game, which is why, again, we're running so many cards that Soul charge. We really want to consistently see this card in the Soul, but I don't think you need to run 4 copies of this card because 3 is pretty much the ceiling that this card is extremely effective in, and even 2 is pretty good. Seeing 1 of it is, maybe just okay, but seeing 2 of it in your Soul is where you unlock the potential of this card, in my opinion. So, and the fact that, again, it has no restrictions, doesn't require a counterblast, doesn't require a generation break, doesn't require any of that, just makes this card flat out amazing, and it's a necessary combo piece for when we go into our Harri turns with Darklord Princess, as well as even our vanilla grade 3 turns involving Venus Luquier and such. So 3 copies is perfectly fine. You can run 4 if you want, but I like 3. It's been pretty good in my experience. And finally, for our grade 1 lineup, we've got 2 copies of Silver Thorn Clown Cernay. So Cernay, the main reason why I'm running it in this deck is that it allows you to get multi-attacks once again without requiring a counterblast. That first skill, Generation Break 1, put into your Soul and discard a card. After the battle, it boosts Vanguard with Silver Thorn. It doesn't even have to be Vanguard Silver Thorn in its name. It just after a boost of Vanguard, then you put it into your Soul and call Silver Thorn back out. That allows you to call into Zelma, which allows you to put something else in the Soul, and then you can either call back Cernay out again, or you can call something else. And then, of course, if you boost it with Darklord Princess, then you can just call back Cernay out, and then boost Cernay with the new card that you strode with Darklord Princess's skill. So Cernay, again, allows your mid-game combos to really shine as well. But again, 2 copies because this card early game does not really do anything. But you do want to see it in the Soul at some point. Seeing 1 of it in the Soul is all you need. And we're running 2 copies again because if you see 1 in the damage zone, at least you have another that you can get with Lilian or any other card that can Soul Charge. We have a bunch of ways to Soul Charge and filter through the deck like that. So 2 copies is perfectly good. And then the second skill does come up. If you don't have enough cards in hand to be able to spam like your Silver Thorns from the Soul and assemble the knights, you know what I mean? Then Cernay's ability to call herself from Soul by counterblasting 1 really allows you to go into your plays without too much from hand. So that does come up, but generally I don't use the second skill that much because you do want to save your counterblast for things like Selvia and Harri and Venus Luquier. So just keep in mind that we're really focused on the first skill for this card, not the second skill as much. So that's going to do it for the grade 1s. Let's go ahead and go into the grade 2s, of which we're running 12. So we'll start off with the best grade 2 for setting up Soul, and the best grade 2 for consistency as well. We're running 4 copies of Silver Thorn Marionette Lilian. Lilian is what makes Silver Thorn extremely consistent. She allows you to, on place, counterblast 1 and search for any Silver Thorn in your deck and put it in the Soul, which might as well be as good as basically putting it in your hand. Because your Soul in this deck is almost like a second hand. It's really a resource that you just tap into at the click of a button. You can really think of Lilian as the conductor for Silver Thorn in terms of managing the circus and ensuring that everyone's lined up and ready to go in terms of their role and and getting the combos off. So Lilian, again, I think mandatory 4 copies of. You want to see her grade 2 turn. She's very good on grade 2 turn. She's not the best grade 2 right target though, and the only reason for this is because of opportunity cost. Clan Collection Volume 3 did change that, of course, with the new card that we got in Maricica, who's now the best grade 2 right target. But again, that's only because of opportunity costs. That doesn't mean that Lilian's a bad grade 2 right target at all. In fact, Lilian is what allows you to search for Lolotte, which is why we don't have to run Lolotte as our starting Vanguard. And then Lilian also allows you to search into your other normal units in your deck that we're not running very many copies of, such as Cernay, such as Doriane, such as Doriane's restricted to 1, by the way. So being able to search Doriane is pretty amazing, and turns out to come up a lot, especially for this deck. And then we're of course able to search out Cernay as well as Selvia, which Selvia we do need to see 1 of those in Soul by the time we go into our combos. Otherwise, we're in big trouble. So Lilian, again, really important. We're running 4 of her because she is the searcher for the deck. She's a searcher for all the combo plays that we're able to make for the whole game. Next up, we've got 3 copies of Maricica. This card I've had a love-hate relationship with ever since it released and was revealed in Clan Collection Volume 3. I was running 4 copies of her in previous builds, and the only reason for that was like, all right, she is the best grade 2 ride, technically speaking. However, I don't really want to see more than one of her in the soul, because you only really need 1 or 2 in the soul in order for her to be good. That second skill, again, similar to Ana, is really restrictive in my opinion. It not only triggers when it's placed by the ability of your Vanguard with Silver Thorn in its name, but also it has a check on whether it's still on the rearguard circle, unlike some of the other Silver Thorns that activate when they're on the rearguard circle initially, such as Doriane and Lolotte and other cards. Some of those cards don't even check if they're still in the rearguard circle, which allows you to use them still if you put them in the soul later on. But this card checks it's on the rearguard circle and can only call a grade 2 or greater Silver Thorn from your soul. Meaning that with Maricica is pretty much like a gateway into Selvia. It allows us to get an extra plus 3,000 power off of our normal combos, because this card doesn't require any counterblast for its second skill. So basically, if you were going to call her off of like a Venus Luquier or even one of your strides, then you call into this by their ability, and then you use this to call into Selvia rather than calling Selvia directly, because that is an extra 3,000 power on your upright lines, which does make a difference. But otherwise, I'm not like a huge fan of Maricica, to be honest. But I do think you have to run at least 3 of her, maybe 4, in order for her to be the best that she can be, because she is technically your best grade 2 ride target. When she's placed on Vanguard Circle, she's able to counterblast 1, soul charge 3, and if you soul charge 2 or more Silver Thorn cards, then you draw a card. So again, similar to Ana, where you're building that soul, you're able to cycle through your deck by drawing a card, and it really allows you to get going. If you soul charge a grade 3, in fact, then you're able to like, for example, you soul charge a Venus Luquier, or even a Luquier reverse. That means you're allowed to go into them on your grade 3 turn and really make the most of what this deck can do, which is having fantastic grade 3 turns and such. So Maricica does play a role in this deck, but again, I'm not super keen on her as an individual card. I do wish that she were able to trigger her ability when placed by the ability of anything, not just a Vanguard. But you know, it is what it is. We'll just make use of her as much as we can. So 3 copies. And then next up, we've got, again, one of the most important combo pieces for this deck. We got 2 copies of Silver Thorn Diva Selvia. This card, I think, single-handedly made Silver Thorn a reasonable deck to play in Premium ever since it was released in the same set as, I believe, Venus Luquier. And the thing about Selvia, why we're running her at 2 copies, in the past I was running her at 3 copies, but again, she's one of the cards where you only need to see 1 of it at any point in the game. Once you have 1 in rotation, meaning either in your soul or in your hand, then you're good to go for the rest of the game in terms of your combo pieces and your combo plays. So that's why I'm running 2 copies of her. Plus, she's searchable off of Lilian, and she's easily soul chargeable off the several cards we're running that are able to soul charge and filter and this and that. So I do think Selvia at 2 copies is perfectly fine. Now, if you feel more comfortable with 3 copies because you're running Lolotte as your starting Vanguard, then I think that's perfectly fine. And you know, you do have options in the grade 1 lineup such as Romy to make that a little more easy as well. But I do think 2 copies of Selvia is all that you need for the whole game. So this is perfectly fine at the ratio it's being run. And again, she's extremely important. She allows you to do your whole combos with Upright Lion and filling your board off of 1 card in hand. That's a Dixie. Basically, what you can do is you do whatever ride you do whatever stride you're going to, and then you call Dixie from hand. Make sure that, of course, you have a Luquier Vanguard if you're using Dixie. Then use Dixie's skill to put her on the top of the deck. Shuffle, call Selvia from soul. Use Selvia's skill, counterblast 1, call 2 more. One of them should be a Zelma. The other one can be an Upright Line if you want, but make sure if you do Upright Line, you call Upright Line first so that Upright Line will get the extra 3,000 from the other card you called. Let's say you called as Zelma. Then you use Zelma to put Selvia in the soul, call Selvia back out, and then use Selvia's skill again to call counterblast 1, call 2 more, and that's how you build your board from that. And that's why Selvia, again, is very much necessary for all your combo pieces. So make sure that you do have her in your soul by the time you're ready to go. Otherwise, you're in huge trouble. And finally, we've got the most important, basically the most important rear guard of the deck. 3 copies of Silver Thorn Upright Lion. Upright Lion is a bit of an old card, but old is gold for this deck. This card happened to get better and better basically as more Silver Thorn cards released, especially during V-Series. And even right now to this day, I think it remains to be one of the target rear guards that we're really trying to benefit from with this deck. I I've seen a lot of Silver Thorn list run instead, I think, the Rising Dragon that came in V Series, which I think they're really selling themselves short. This card can really exceed the power that Rising Dragon can hit. Rising Dragon can really only get to, like, let's say 24,000 power, 29,000 power. This card can get 50k power basically just by doing your normal turn. Of course, you do have to invest your resources in calling a lot from Soul, but Zelma allows us to do that with relative ease, not to mention that we do have the multi-attacks with Harri and Darklord Princess to make that even easier. And despite this card not having any sort of inherent guard restrict, it's not needed. We're basically selling our opponent PG or die with this kind of card. And we're running him at 3 copies because typically your setup here is to get them on the Excel circles. And with this deck, we really only need 2 or 3 Excel circles per game. And both of those Excel circles should be filled with this card. So I was saying, okay, the upper limit should be 3. I do think you can run this at 4 copies. Just if you can build 3 Excel circles consistently each game, then you can definitely run this card at 4 copies in my opinion. But I'm running 3 because typically I reach 2 to 3 Excel circles per game. Plus, seeing even 2 is pretty devastating because at the end of the turn, they'll all go back to the Soul anyway, with Doriane and other cards that we have that can do that. So you're able to protect them from being retired regardless. So I do think 3 copies is perfectly fine. But do make sure that you get this in your Soul at one point. If you're really starving for seeing this card in your Soul, you can search it off of Lilian. But I do think that Lilian has more important targets that are being run at fewer copies that you can search into, like Doriane and Selvia. So do make sure you see this into your Soul by means of Emile or even Irina early game and Maricica early game and things like that. And of course, we also have G Guardian options that will get this in the Soul more easily too. But again, this card is extremely important. This is what we're doing all the combos for. So do make sure that when you get it out, that you stack it to as much power as possible by calling as many cards from Soul to Rigor Circle as you can. All right, so that's all for the grade 2s. Let's go into the grade 3s now. We've got 3 copies of Venus Luquier from V-Series. Venus Luquier is your best grade 3 ride. She is how you get your Excel circles early game, especially on your first, if you're going first. Your first grade 3 turn is really strong because this card, again, allows you to basically build your whole board with a single counterblast. And especially now that we have Anna and Maricica, we're able to call an Upright Lion and put pressure on our opponent early on, because we can get that counterblast back that we used for Venus Luquier off of Anna, and of course Anna can then go back in the Soul, which means that we'll free up space for other regards to call off of Maricica and Selvia, which means that we're able to get some threatening multi-attacks from our first turn and onward. And this happens to also be a good ride to go into late game because, again, Silver Thorn's grade 3 gaming is actually pretty good. A lot of times it's better than some of your stride turns. Pretty much after you do Darklord Princess, after you do Fairfield, then your strides start to get weaker and weaker. So this card starts to become even better late game when you expended your strides and you don't really want to commit with discarding grade 3. So you can just still fill your board with this card because a single counterblast, again, is really good. And that's why I like running this card over the V-Series Luquier, the original V-Series Luquier, before we receive Venus Luquier. I do think the original V-Series Luquier, all it's good for now is pretty much a beat stick because it does get +10 when you call 2 or more cards from Soul. But the ability to counterblast 2, discard a card, I think has been power crept because our counterblasts in this deck are precious, and being able to fill your board with still a single counterblast because of Anna, because of Selvia, and cards like that, and of course Zelma as well. I do think that all we need is Venus Luquier in this deck. Not to mention that, again, as our first grade 3 ride, we're able to get another Excel if we need to. Typically now, I don't do this because I'm usually filling my... I'm usually using Doriane to clear my rear guards into the Soul in order to get that card draw, which is more important than getting 1 Excel circle, especially since we can get that Excel circle still with Yvette from our G zone. Doing Darklord Princess into Yvette allows us to still get an Excel circle, so I don't think you necessarily need to prioritize the last part with getting the Excel circle, especially if you do have Doriane. But if you don't have Doriane, then it's perfectly fine to use that last part to get the Excel circle. So again, this is our best grade 3 ride. 3 copies of her, though, because we don't really need 4 copies, in my opinion. The next up, we've got the one of Silver Thorn Beast Tamer Doriane. We have to run 1 because it's at 1. Please free this card, Bushy Road, if you hear me. I would run 3 or 2 if it were allowed, maybe even 4. But unfortunately, this is all that's allowed, so we just got to run the 1. And then we're running 1 copy of Luquier Reverse from Clan Collection Volume 3. So let's go over these 2. Doriane, if you see this card in your soul at any point, then you are going to be good on card economy for the whole game. This card is what allows you to not only protect your rear guards on your opponent's turn because you put them into the soul at the end of your turn, but also gives you insane card draw because you draw 1 for every 2 rear guard you put into the soul, which is usually going to be 4 to 6, 4 around early game, and then it's going to become 6 towards mid and late game. So that means you draw 2 early game and you draw 3 late game. And because we drew 2, then you can add grade 3s from your soul to your hand, which again, that's basically a free +3 off of a single card. So it's pretty insane. So Doriane, again, pretty good card to go into. And she happens to also not be such a bad card to ride into because, again, you won't have to retire her from her own skill when it's used on the rearguard circle. Now, there is a way to avoid that retiring on rearguard circle that involves Lolotte. Basically, if you have this on rearguard circle and you have Lolotte on your rearguard circle, at the end of your turn, you should trigger Lolotte first, put Doriane in the soul, and then use Lolotte's ability to countercharge, and then you can add a Doriane from your soul to your hand, or any other grade 3 card that's already in your soul. And then you use Doriane's ability. Doriane's ability does not require it to still be on rearguard circle after it's already in standby. So because they both Lolotte and Doriane enter standby at the same time, then you're able to use both, even though Doriane's not on the rearguard circle anymore, which means that because it's not on the rearguard circle, you won't have to do the part that says retire this unit on rearguard circle. So that way you're able to keep the recursion going, you're able to keep the card draw going throughout the whole game. So that's why Lolotte, again, extremely important to have, but we're not running her as a starter, so do make sure that you keep that in mind whenever you put Doriane into the soul. Of course, if you see Doriane in your damage zone, then you'll just have to sob in a corner because you do miss out on a lot, but it is not an auto lose, I assure you. So don't give up hope when you see her in the damage zone. And then we're running 1 copy of Luquier Reverse. This card I thought was underwhelming when I first saw it, but as a one-of, I think it's actually been pretty useful, especially in its ability to generate Excel markers pretty much on any turn that you need them. The fact that you lock your own rearguards is actually not too bad because they unlock at the end of the turn anyway before your auto abilities enter standby, which means that if you have Doriane and Lolotte on your rearguard circle still and they get locked, after they unlock, you'll still be able to get their abilities, which allows you to, the counter charge, add the grade 3 from soul to hand, and then Doriane allows you to suck in your rearguards into the soul and then draw off of that as well. So again, I don't think Luquier Reverse is actually that much of a crutch for this deck. She really helps out in giving those Excel markers, but I do not think she's that useful for much else other than the edge cases where you face a Link Joker player and they lock your rearguards. Then this happens to be your best ride against that because if they lock your rearguards, then it's just basically free breathing room for this card to give yourself and your other front row rearguards or front row units plus 3,000 power for each of your lock cards. So if that does come up when you face Link Joker, then you can throw your hands up in happiness. But I don't think that Luquier Reverse is extremely necessary for this deck, which is why it's a 1 copy in this deck. But if you feel more comfortable with 2 copies, then go right ahead. I do think it's fine as a 2 of, but no more than 2 copies I think this card be run at. All right, and the last grade 2s we're running are 2 copies of Silver Thorn Dragon Tamer Luquier. Wait, this is not V-Series Luquier. This is not OG Luquier. This is G-Era Luquier. What's she doing in this deck? Yes, you saw this correctly. This is G-Era Luquier. This is mostly a tech card that never comes up and pretty much nothing else. However, I am running Luquier Strides in this deck, so I felt like having her in the deck just in case I want to go into the Stride bonus was still okay. However, of course, I do not think that you have to run G-Era Luquier. You can instead decide to run V-Series Luquier if you'd like, just for that extra beat stick. But I do not think V-Series Luquier is 100% necessary, especially since it's still $30. It's been $30 pretty much ever since it released, and I do not know if it's worth the money to get a 22k beat stick. So any other Luquier that you'd like to run is just fine. You can even run more Venus Luquiers in the slot, or even more Luquier Reverse in the slot. But I do think the G-Era Luquier is a solid budget option, And we do have G era strides in our G zone. We do have Luquier strides in our G zone. So having this stride bonus available actually does come up, because the extra 3,000 for each rearguard you call is extremely important for hitting magic numbers. So again, but okay, I will admit, most of the time we're discarding this card for stride costs. We're not usually using the stride bonus anyway. Well, that's going to do it for the main deck. Let's go ahead and go into the G zone. So I know I spent a lot of time on the main deck, but again, I feel like it's very important to understand each card's role, because it is a combo deck. Each card is 100% necessary to see when you need to see it, and now we're going to see more so why those cards were necessary when we start getting to the G units. So let's start with 2 copies. We start with our Luquier strides. We got 2 copies of Venus Luquier and 2 copies of Mystique Luquier. In the past, when I was focusing on G era Luquier as, you know, the main ride target, before we got Venus Luquier, of course, meaning V Series Venus Luquier, that is, I was mostly trying to get the most off of Venus Luquier, because she is technically +1 from Soul, and she does require a Persona flip, but it's not a huge deal because you don't really want to use her more than once anyway. She's more like a first stride. But to be honest, ever since Yvette was released in Premium Collection 2020, I found just doing Darklord Princess into Yvette is a better first stride option than any of these Luquier strides. But these are still available because we are running the G era Luquier for that stride bonus, and you do need to have a Luquier stride. You do need to go into a Luquier stride in order to benefit from those. And plus, I do think that Venus Lucier's ability to put 2 of your rearguards into Soul and get an extra crit is actually a nice way of playing mind games with your opponent, forcing them to guard with more cards than they would probably otherwise do because they don't want to take 2 damage. And that way your upright lines have a more chance of hitting as well. But again, I do think Venus Lucier's role in this G zone has kind of declined, especially in favor of the Darklord Princess package. And then Mystique Luquier, I actually think a while ago, not too long ago, in fact, I had cut this card from the G zone entirely. I think recently it was only recently that I brought it back to 1 copy in the G zone. And the reason for this, and of course now you see it at 2 copies in the G zone, but the reason I brought it back is actually because now with Anna that we got from Clan Collection Volume 3, we're actually able to use this card to get a net counter charge. Because if we call Anna off of this card's skill from our Soul, then we're able to get a counter charge for free without spending a counterblast in order to do so. So that is actually pretty non-trivial. Not to mention that if we needed to build a little more Soul because we were unable to early on in the game, then Mystique Luquier, allows us to Soul charge off the top of the deck and call 2 from our rearguard circle to Soul, or to our rearguard circle from Soul, which allows us to build again that field without having to spend too much from hand, as long as we're able to get those initial rearguards for the cost onto the field. So these cards do come up, but I haven't used them as much because, of course, the Darklord Princess package is just too good, and it's unfortunate that all the new strides for Pale Moon have to be built with Darklord Princess in mind. But let's go ahead and explain the Darklord Princess package. We've got 1 copy of Yvette, 2 copies of Darklord Princess herself, 2 copies of 2 copies of Masquerade Master Harri, and 1 copy of Dragon Masquerade Harri. So this is our Darklord Princess package. Let me kind of move this around a little bit. Usually the stride you're going into off of Darklord Princess is either Harri or Yvette. And when I say Harri, I mean Masquerade Master Harri. Typically, Dragon Masquerade Harri is for niche cases where you want to remove an opponent's rearguard, but because it costs an extra counterblast, it's pretty expensive, so I usually don't go into it. And plus its cost requires that you only put 1 of your rearguards into Soul, whereas Masquerade Master Harri requires that you put 2 of your rearguards into Soul. And actually, I think the 2 of your rearguards into Soul is a lot better because it frees up more space in your columns. That way you're able to get multi-attacks more cleanly, such as with Lilian and Zelma and such. And the reason I say Lilian is because Lilian gets an extra 10k by its own skill when it attacks a Vanguard if you have 4 different names in your Soul, which definitely does come up, especially when we're not taking into consideration our upright lines. Since our upright lines are usually the only big numbers that we're hitting for, having that Lilian available is pretty good, which is why also I do think there's an argument to running V-Series, the original V-Series Luquier in this deck, because that is a beat stick that can hit numbers that you wouldn't otherwise be able to hit in this deck. But typically, your first stride option is to go into Darklord Princess, into Yvette if you don't want to spend Counterblast. And then your mid to late game stride option is to do Darklord Princess into Harri. And this is, with Harri, you're able to get pretty close to 9 attacks. And then if you have 2 upright lines, both of those upright lines should be about 60,000 power. So it's going to be really devastating for your opponent. It's going to be tough for them to deal with. It's not impossible for them to survive. But again, we're looking to just put pressure on our opponent. This deck doesn't have any way to guard restrict them. And we don't have the loops that Nightmare Doll has. So we just got to work with what we've got in terms of going into Dark Princess with Harri for the multi-attacks, which really the goal of the multi-attacks is just to get upright line to higher numbers. And just as a side note, stop running 4 of this card, okay? This card is not as good running 4 copies of it. Not to mention, we shouldn't be running 3 copies of Dark Princess because Silver Thorn has an exceptionally good grade 3 gaming. We don't really need to stride that much. And filling our G zone with more of the same unit does not make this deck any more consistent than it already is. So basically, with the setup we've got, we're going into Harri. We're going into Masquerade Master Harri only once, which is perfectly fine. That's all we really want to do anyway, because our other Darklord Princess is going to be spent on going into Yvette. And then, of course, the Dragon Masquerade Harri for its respective situation, but we don't need more than what we've already running. You can technically cut this for another Yvette. I think it's perfectly fine because Yvette at least can be strode on its own, and it's not a bad stride. But again, I don't think this card should not be run at 4 copies. This card should not be run at more than 2 copies, at least in Silver Thorn. And I think what we've got in this G zone is perfectly fine in terms of what we're trying to accomplish with our upright line turns. Now, of course, if you don't feel comfortable with the Luquier strides, then there's definitely, of course, more space for the Darklord Princess package. But again, I think these ratios are fine for what they are. And last but not least, we've got 1 copy of Fairfield. This card has been a superstar for late game. I cannot tell you the number of times where I thought I was close to decking out, but then I was like, oh yeah, I have Fairfield in my G zone. And boy, does that make a huge difference. With Fairfield, you're allowed to basically, let me read out its skill because I feel like it's very important to highlight this card. So it's an activated ability. Soft ones per turn. You have to have Generation Break 3. You counterblast 2 and choose a card from your drop zone and your soul and return them to the deck. And then you choose a card from your soul, call it to rearguard circle. That card gets plus 10,000 power and plus 1 crit until end of turn, and then also gets an activated ability to Soul Blast 2 until end of turn. This unit gets plus 5,000 power and cannot be chosen by card effects. And then you shuffle your deck. And at the end of the turn, you put the unit call with this effect into your soul. This is extremely important for not decking out late game. And if you look carefully at its cost, the counterblast 2 and put a card from your soul and drop zone into your deck, it says card. It does not say normal unit. It does not say put a non-grade 0 unit. It says card, which means if you're running low on cards in your deck, and you have a bunch of triggers and you have a bunch of triggers in your soul and your drop zone, all you got to do is put a critical trigger from your soul and then a critical trigger from your drop zone back into your deck, and those can be a 10k crit, it can be a 5k crit, it doesn't actually matter. But once you put those back in your deck and then you attack with this, you're pretty much guaranteeing yourselves to see a crit because you have low cards in your deck and you have a pretty high chance of seeing those cards that you just put back. Not to mention the ability to actually give the card you called plus 10k and a crit, again, makes a huge difference. It really turns around the mind games in terms of how your opponent's going to guard. Not to mention that it can't be chosen by card effects, which also means that it won't be able to be denial Griffined in the respective matchups where that's possible, such as against Kog'Yoro and Grand Blue. So Fairfield is actually an all-star for this deck, and I'm glad that it's actually got room. I'm glad that this deck actually has room to run it, because again, you find yourself in a deck out situation more often than you might expect, and this card is really a lifesaver in those situations, especially if you're not comfortable going into the grade 3 turn, which, typically after the grade 3 turn, you have to either draw cards at the end of the turn or you have to get an Excel, which might get you closer to decking out, but this card can stop that from happening because it puts cards back into the deck. So Fairfield is an all-star. All right, and for the G-Guardians, honestly, the G-Guardians for Pale Moon are not good. They're not good at all. The one okay card is Wandering Dragon, but Wandering Dragon is only 2 copies in this deck because it does Soul Charge, which means it can sometimes mess up your trigger filtering that you've done off of Emile. Typically, when you go into Wandering Dragon, you want to go into like early game, mid game, when your deck is still, relatively when your deck is still has a relatively balanced ratio of triggers and normal units. But then late game, especially when you're about to deck out, that Soul Charge can really hurt, can really sting, especially if you Soul Charge an Overtrigger. That can really be the finishing blow. However, Soul Charging an Overtrigger is not the worst because technically you could call it from the Soul. And again, Wandering Dragon is pretty much our only noteworthy G Guardian that we have. Bushy Road, please print better Pale Moon G Guardians. The rest of these are garbage. Coulthard, while it could have been okay, the condition is a little too restrictive. It requires you to have 4 different grades in your soul in order to get a mere plus 15,000 shield. And then you also have to turn up a G Guardian from your G Zone face up. Not very good, sadly. Furnival's okay early game, but typically we've built our soul enough by the time Furnival comes into play, so he's not that useful. And then same thing with Maja. You soul charge 3, and that's all you do, because we're not running any Maja cards in our deck. So, yeah, overall pretty poor G Guardians. I already explained earlier in the deck profile why Wandering Dragon has a good spot in this deck, but the rest of the G Guardians are a little underwhelming, sadly. That's all there is to say about the G Guardians, and actually that's all there is to say about this entire deck. I hope you enjoyed it. Silver Thorn is a solid rogue option in this current meta. I think they can do, they can do some surprising turns, especially with the Upright Lions. It resembles some of the Skull Dragon turns that Grand Blue can pull off in their deck. But regardless, I hope you enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching. I hope to see you in the next one. Hopefully, I will have a combo video for Silver Thorn uploaded soon. So look forward to that. In the combo video, I'll kind of go over the main plays that you seek to do on your grade 3 turn, on your grade 2 turn even, and also on your stride turns, and then going in towards late game where we go into Fairfield. So look out for the combo video pretty soon. But with that, thanks for watching, and I hope to see you then.